Now, welcome to today's webcast. Again, as Matt said, my name is Chuck Haggerty. I'm responsible for strategic alliances for CBI. Today's session is on threat landscapes, next generation attack vectors. We are very privileged to have a guest speaker, Kevin Thompson from FireEye. Before I introduce Kevin, I would like to just provide a brief overview of CBI, what we do for a living, and who we are. So CBI is a risk management company established in 1991 by Steve Baroni. He's still our CEO, and it's always been a private company. We are services-led and solutions-led versus product-led. We find out how we can help our customers and bring the right tools, the right solutions, and the right services. We have very talented and experienced people that deliver excellence in everything that they do. And I can tell you that we have very talented and experienced people because we are a very cool place to work. We've been written up in Crane's Business Journal in 2012 as a cool place to work and other local press. We're driven by customer sat, and what I mean by that is we have a measurement system and a compensation that's driven by CSAT scores by our customers. It's not billable hours or utilization, and it drives specific behavior towards customer sat. We're very community focused. Where we have a presence in the community, we're very involved and participate in the community. For example, in Detroit, Steve Baroni founded the Detroit Area Rescue Team several years ago, and it still is in existence. So what do we do for a living? As I mentioned, CBI is a risk management company. Our overall objective is to protect your most important assets, which is your data, your IP, your reputation, and your brand. How do we do that? We do that in really 4 key areas. Number one, and this chart is color coordinated. You can tell, number one, through operations and management. This is really our methodology, is how we go to market, how we deliver our solutions to you. The second is compliance and government, and that's in orange. We help you create your risk management strategy. The third is test and improve, which is our assessments that we deliver to you. And the final one is, which is in blue, which is defend and secure. These are the tools and the solutions that we deliver. And then a few stats about CBI. Number one, security has been our focus, sole focus since 1998. It's in our DBA. This is just not something that you can dabble in. We are one of the fastest growing IT risk management companies in the world with triple-digit growth. As you can see, last year we added 150 new customers just in 2014. We have over 100 Fortune 500 customers. Our delivery mechanism is by our own people. We have over 40 senior level consultants and dedicated pre-sales engineers. These are our own people. These are not contracted out. We are on most of the advisory boards of the major security OEMs, which provides us capabilities to deliver valued solutions to you. And then finally, we have built a partner ecosystem that is best of breed. And these are our non-competing partners where we take the industry's best solutions and deliver them to you. Now I'd like to introduce Kevin Thompson. Kevin is a threat analyst for FireEye. Before joining FireEye, Kevin worked as a cyber analyst for the CIA in Washington, D.C. Kevin's analytic work has been included in presidential daily briefings. Kevin is also a regular speaker in technical workshops and cyber threat conferences around the United States and Canada. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Please let me know if anyone has any problems hearing me. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. My name is Kevin Thompson. I'm a threat analyst for FireEye. And for the next 45 minutes or an hour or so, I'm going to talk about the different ways that we see companies using threat intelligence, some key ways, some 3 steps that we see sort of highlight best practices in threat intelligence. And then I'll talk about the 5 ways that companies can identify if they're being targeted. So assuming you have hundreds or maybe thousands of different security hits coming through your security tools every day, what are some of the things that you can do or identify that can help you maybe tell if these attacks are specifically targeted towards your organization or if they're more of a shotgun approach? And then lastly, depending on how much time we have, we'll talk about some of the things that FireEye is doing when it comes to the threat intel area. So as previously mentioned, so I've been with FireEye for around 3 years, and my role is mainly to focus on what the threats are to our customers, or the threats are to different industries. So we'll work with customers in a variety of industries like healthcare, financial, government, technology, oil and gas, etc. And we'll talk to them about why they're being targeted. From a technology standpoint, what sort of techniques and technologies are the actors using when they're targeting these industries? But also, more importantly, what is the reason they're being targeted, and who are they being targeted by? Do we have any information about the actors that are targeting them, and what sort of techniques that those actors use? So before that, I had spent 6 years in the U.S. government. I was a cyber analyst for the CIA, and my role there was mainly focused on nation-state actors that were targeting the U.S. government. So what their techniques were from a technology perspective, but then also from a policy and a political and an economic standpoint. Why are they targeting the U.S.? Why are they targeting the U.S. allies? What are some of the things that we can learn from how they're targeting them and how we can identify what areas that we need to protect? So as we go through this, I tried to take out as much of the acronyms as I could. But if there's any questions that you see or anything that comes up, please feel free to use the chat on the bottom right there, and I'll be checking that periodically as I go throughout the presentation. So the first thing, when a lot of companies and organizations talk about threat intelligence, mainly what they're talking about in this slide here is the gray areas. So they're talking about things like malware family, an individual piece of malware, or how that malware moves throughout the network. So maybe, is there an MD5 from that piece of malware? Does it use a specific callback? How does it get onto the network? When we're talking about threat intelligence, what we're really talking about from our perspective is all the areas you see on this slide. So we want to talk about the actual actors, who are the guys at the keyboards, but then we also want to know about the sponsors. So who are the guys that are paying the guys on the keyboard? What are the guys that are paying them? What's their goals? What is the information that they're trying to steal? And then we want to see some trending information. Are there any trends that we can see when we look in specific areas or regional? Are certain attacks more prevalent in Asia versus the United States? Are certain attacks more likely to happen against the financial industry versus the healthcare industry? And we also want to be able to identify any industry trends that we're seeing. So as we talk about threat intelligence, keep in mind we want to talk about all of these areas and not just necessarily an individual piece of malware or a malicious file and how it goes throughout the network. So from a FireEye perspective, what that really looks like is there's 3 areas that we internally call sort of the adaptive defense. And this is how we do it internally. And we'll talk in the next couple of slides on how some of the best practices for other organizations that we had seen. But internally, when we talk about the adaptive defense, there's really 3 areas. The first one is the technology, using our patented virtual machine technology to be able to identify known and unknown malware-based threats, but then tying that into the expertise, the people, the go-to people who are called whenever there's some of the largest breaches around the world, some of that institutional knowledge that has been built up over the years. And then lastly, tying that into the intelligence. So being able to discover 0 days, being able to pull information from malware and incident response, and then being able to use the information that we had gleaned about the actual actors and create multiple threat actor profiles. So from a FireEye perspective, this is what it looks like internally, but from a customer perspective, on some of the best practices that we had seen, companies use sort of a similar 3-step circle. And for this one, we call it sort of the Intel circle. And each step ties into the other step, and you can learn about each one by looking at where you had been. So the 3 areas that we focus on, we see a lot of some of the stronger organizations focus when it comes to threat intel, are malware analysis, incident response, and then strategic analysis. So I'll talk about each one of these in depth, but they really tie in each one together. The first one, malware analysis, what that is just as it sounds. So what sort of pieces of malware, what sort of tools are attackers using to target your individual organization or target companies within your industry? But outside of an individual piece of malware, what is the infection vector that you're seeing? Are attackers coming in via web? Are they coming in via email? Are they coming in via SQL injection? Are they coming in via mobile attacks? What's the infection vector that you're seeing on your network? And then once you see that, taking the next step, okay, attackers have gotten access to the network. Tying in the incident response to what are the attackers doing when they get access to a network? How are they moving laterally throughout that network? Are they using credentials? Are they using traditional Windows command lines? What sort of information are they going after? And then lastly, tying that into the strategic analysis of the who and the what. So who are the attackers? What are they going after? And what are their goals? And continuing this intelligence cycle. Adding in the campaign tracking is what makes it contextual. So in the healthcare industry or in the financial industry, this is the type of malware we see. These are the type of attacks. And in the healthcare or in the financial industry, when attackers get online onto a network, here's how they move laterally throughout a network. And then the strategic analysis. In the oil and gas or in the healthcare industry, these are the type of attackers we see target these industries. And this is the data they're trying to steal because they're trying to solve these problems. So a lot of the organizations we see building this cycle of intelligence into their everyday usage and how they're sort of collecting this information. So the first part I'll talk about is the malware analysis itself. So I went and wanted to pull some statistics about some of the things that we're seeing. So again, malware analysis is not only just the individual files, but the infection vector. How are attackers getting onto a network? So what I did is I identified the 10 zero days discovered by FireEye Labs, took a random sampling, and wanted to see which ones are using web versus which ones are using email. So of the 10 zero days, 7 of them were using a web-based attack or a drive-by download, meaning they were infecting a website and they were having their victim go to that website, and the website was taking advantage of some vulnerability, and they were taking advantage of a zero-day vulnerability to infect their end users that way. And then 3 of those 10 were using email. So they were using email-based attacks. So they could be using things like 0 day in Word or Excel or in Acrobat or PDF to take advantage of some vulnerability to get access to their victim's network. And 7 of those 10, through our intelligence, we can attribute with high probability that they're tied to possible state-sponsored actors. So you really see the 2 main infection vectors when we see these are both email and web. So then I wanted to take a look at the campaigns themselves. So what sort of campaigns are we seeing? So not individual attackers, but a group of attackers going after specific data. And for those 14 campaigns that I had pulled and sort of done some research on internally, 5 of those campaigns were using email or spear phishing as their main infection vector. The main way they were getting access to these networks was via malicious emails. And 8 of these 14 were using web-based attacks. So again, infecting a website that their victims were going to, and then taking advantage of some vulnerability to infect them that way. And one group was specifically changing up their tactics depending on who they were targeting. They were using both web and email to target their end users. So when we looked at both the 0 days and the traditional campaign of actors, we really saw that web and email were overwhelmingly the 2 largest infection vectors that we saw from our customers. So from a file perspective, when we talk about malware analysis, I took a look and added some of the more interesting file names that we had seen target some of our customers. And they're things more generic or more targeted towards specific companies or individuals, things like using the company name in a file. So company name _invoice.zip. Or things like payslip.pdf.exe with the hopes that the organization has file extensions turned off and they just make it look like it's a PDF file and it's not actually an executable. The third one, the digital cert install. People say, well, why would someone open that? That doesn't look like something that would be legitimate. But what we saw is that around 78% of the observed phishing emails that we had seen were IT or security related. So groups were trying to send malicious emails and make it appear as if they're coming from the internal IT department. So when you send an email coming from the internal IT department and then you say something like digital cert install or new VPN executable install, it makes it a little bit more likely that end users are going to open it. And then files like transcript.txt with a handful of spaces before the executable. Sometimes it'll be .txt and then 15 to 20 spaces between the .txt and the .exe with the idea, again, either you have file extensions turned off or that the amount of spaces will get truncated if you're looking at it in a shortcut view So it'll really just look like a text file when actually it's an executable. So the way that FireEye does this, and the way that sort of we get our advantage from this malware analysis, is being able to analyze all of these files that come in. So analyzing files that come in via email or via web or via mobile or files at rest, and then detonating that into our custom-built virtual execution engine and basically running these files and so we can see what they're actually doing. So when this email comes in and there's a Word doc, what happens if I run this Word document in Windows Office 2010? What happens if I run this in this version of XP, Service Pack 2? What happens if I run it in this version of Windows 7 or Mac OS? Being able to identify, are there malicious activity going on from this file? And then being able to correlate that within virtual machines, within an enterprise, and then across virtual machines, across an individual company, and then across all of our customers. So sharing that information and intelligence across our worldwide customers. So for the malware analysis, we're able to identify by running these files into a virtual sandbox to identify the maliciousness of each file. So the malware analysis is the first part. The second part is the incident response. And the reason why incident response is so important is for this statistic right here. So roughly what we had, hold on, we're going back here. Of all the compromised machines that Mandiant had identified through our incident response capabilities and our incident response engagements throughout the world, of all the compromised machines we had identified, only around 50% of them actually had malware on. So when you look at the remaining 50%, they were compromised, but the attackers were using either legitimate credentials or traditional Windows command line. So this is the reason why incident response is becoming so much more important to organizations. If you have an infection on computer A, and the attackers have used computer A to move computer B, C, and D, and in your security tools or in your security posture, you're able to see that there's a piece of malware on computer A. You take computer A offline, you don't do any incident response, but you just wipe the operating system, put a new operating system on there, and put that computer back onto the network. Without doing that incident response, you'd likely miss that the actors have moved the computer B, C, and D. So at that point, you're really just playing whack-a-mole with getting rid of malware, and you're not actually getting rid of attackers. So this statistic is one of the reasons why we see incident response becoming more and more used in some of the organizations that we work with. So through our incident response capabilities, we've been able to pull some statistics on what we're seeing when it comes to actually what the attackers are doing when they're on a network. So keep in mind, this is not the malware we're talking about. This is attackers around the network, so what are they doing now? So some interesting stats that we had saw is the median numbers of days from breach to when their detection was 205 days. Now that number has decreased from 229 days in 2013, and it also has decreased from 243 days in 2012. But you can see that the number of days, 205 days, is still an extremely long amount of time for attackers to have access within a network. From our engagements, we were able to see that around 70% of the victims were notified of their breach by a third party, meaning the internal IT department didn't identify the breach. They were notified maybe by the FBI, law enforcement, banks, their customers, maybe journalists like Brian Krebs, or security companies like ourselves. So 70% of them were being identified or notified by a third party. And in the investigations that we had done, 42% of the attacks, 42% of the investigations, there were some state-sponsored actors involved in those attacks. So having the insight and the incident response also allowed us to see what the attackers are doing when they get access to a network. So the biggest change that we had seen from 2013 to 2014 is the initial thing that attackers were doing is they were looking for VPN access. They were looking for VPN legitimate credentials. They were looking for how the VPN was set up. They were looking for if there's client-side certificates. Maybe there were some rule sets or some security set up around the VPN. We've seen attackers use malware to get onto a network, then remove that malware once they receive the legitimate VPN credentials. We've seen attackers get around single-factor authentication and bad two-factor authentication. So bad two-factor authentication in the sense that an organization is using two-factor authentication, but if you need a new PIN or you need a new password, you can click on a link on a website and it'll email you a new password or a new PIN number. And the attackers had access to the organization's email, so they were just resetting their VPN passwords or resetting the VPN pins and then logging in that way. So getting around bad two-factor authentication. So the incident response really allowed us to see what the attackers are doing when they're getting onto the network. And the biggest change that we had seen the last year is the attackers were instantly looking for that legitimate VPN access to make it more difficult for them to be identified and to make it to hide in more legitimate traffic. So the strategic analysis is the third part. So you have the malware analysis of how the attackers are getting onto a network. What tools are they using? Are they using web? Are they using email? How are they getting onto a network? The incident response is what are they doing when they're moving on these networks? Are they using VPN access? Are they using Windows command lines? Are they using WMI? Are they using PowerShell? What are some of the tools they're using? And then lastly, the strategic analysis. So who are the attackers we see targeting our industry? And what is their goal? What is some of the information that we see them going after? And the reason why strategic analysis is becoming so much more important is because the targeted attacks are different. You're focusing on a who and not the what. So there's actual attackers at the keyboard. So again, we talk about malware being the means to the end. So if we focus solely on a malware issue and we try to remove the malware, again, we're not just removing the actor. We're just sort of playing whack-a-mole with the malware, and we're not actually solving the problems of organized attackers within our networks. Another reason why strategic analysis is becoming so much more important is this blurred lines that we're seeing. Over the last year and into 2015, we've really seen an increase in the blurring of the lines between state-sponsored actors and cyber criminals. The attribution is becoming harder and harder. We can no longer look at an individual piece of malware or look at a file that was stolen and say, that was China, or that was a cyber criminal, or that was Russia. You really have to do this analysis on who the attackers are and what information they're trying to steal to be able to identify what the threats are. So we're starting to see this blurring of the lines of traditional state-sponsored actors who had always been going after intellectual property. We had now seen them start stealing large amounts of personally identifiable information. We've seen breaches in the news that give an association to Chinese state-sponsored actors stealing large personally identifiable information, something we had historically seen cyber criminals do. And on the flip side, we're seeing some cyber criminals in the last year steal intellectual property to look to do stock manipulation for long-term gains. So again, not something we would normally see cyber criminals do. They were more of a smash and grab, try and steal credit card information. But in the last year, we saw a group of cyber criminals steal intellectual property for stock manipulation. So that makes the need for strategic analysis even stronger in identifying, okay, what is the goals of these actors? Historically, what are they doing? And how can we defend against these areas? So another reason why strategic analysis is becoming important. But so fundamentally, when you look at any attack, I think regardless of the type of malware that's being used, regardless of the encryption, regardless of how they get moved throughout a network, or regardless of who they have targeted, fundamentally, I think you can look at any attack, whether it's in the news or on your network, and drop them into one of three buckets. And those three buckets are money, data, and to steal from Batman to watch the world burn. So the money aspect is what you would think. People are trying to steal credit card information. They're trying to steal information that they can quickly monetize. We also see attackers try and monetize individual computers, get access to a network, and then sell off access to that individual computer or network by renting out access so people can use those computers to send out spam or to use it as an attack vector to take down competing websites. So looking for ways to monetize individual computers or monetize the data that they get is one of the things that we see in attacks. The second one is data. This is where you hear sort of the advanced persistent threat or the APT or the nation state perspective. When we talk about data, we're talking about specific actors looking for specific data to solve a specific problem. So you have a country like China who's trying to decrease the pollution or increase the amount of green energy in their products they're manufacturing. They have a problem stated, so attackers are looking to steal information from organizations that can help them solve those individual problems. So that's what we mean when we talk about data or an APT attack. And to watch the world burn, the third one is basically just to cause disruption, to maybe put fake information on a Twitter feed, to delete data, to take down a web server, to post information online, or just basically to cause havoc. So fundamentally, when you look at any attack, I think you can put them into one of these three buckets to have a better understanding of what the goals of the attackers are. So the way that companies are using this strategic intelligence of who the attackers are and why they're targeting it is a couple ways. First, we're seeing it used more in training. So this is to your end users. Look, this is why you can't click on links. There's a group targeting industries just like ours, and they use links in their emails. This is why you can't click on them. We see companies using a better business case, and this is why we need to increase funding for security. This is why we need to bring in organizations like FireEye into our security posture, or this is why we need to do this or do that. Because, look, attackers are out there. We see evidence that they do these techniques, and this is the way we need to defend against them. We see companies using it for change requests as well. Look, this is the reason why we need two-factor authentication. Or this is the reason why we need to update that old version of Java we have. Or this is the reason why we need to do X, Y, or Z. Because, look, there's attackers who are actually doing this. They're from China. They're from Russia. They're cyber criminals. But we have actual proof that this is what they're doing, and this is how they're targeting it. This is why they're targeting it. So it makes the change request have a little bit more of an emphasis. Understanding of what's going on within your industry as well. So what sort of trends are we seeing? But then lastly, surprisingly enough, when we work with organizations, strategic intelligence really allows them to identify what they need to defend against first. Talking to companies and saying, look, there's a group in China that really focuses on cancer research. Sort of an eye-opening to some of the pharmaceutical companies saying, we didn't even know that cancer research was a target area. We really need to update our defenses in that area. But we had no idea that this was a target, and that's really our crown jewels. But we had no idea that this was of interest to advanced nation-state actors. So having an idea of what we need to defend against as well is some of the ways that organizations are using strategic intelligence. So for the next part, I'll go through some of the things that you look for in a targeted attack. So we're understanding the importance of incident response, the importance of malware analysis, the importance of strategic analysis. But how can we identify we're being targeted versus this is more of a shotgun approach? So I pulled 5 ways that I've seen that organizations can tell if an attack is more targeted towards them or more of a shotgun approach. And obviously, this is not the end-all, be-all of every way to identify a targeted attack. But here's some of the trending things that we have seen to help maybe identify if you're looking at hundreds or thousands of hits today, which ones should stand up on the back of your neck, the hair should stand up on the back of your neck. For any Breaking Bad fans, these are the Better Call Saul moments if you see any of these things. So the first one is file name. So a lot of times when we see malware infections, the file name will be like server.exe or malware.exe or something along those lines. But when we actually see it in targeted attacks, some of the times the actual file name will have something to do with an organization. So we've seen companies that were targeted that the file name was used in a malicious remote access tool. A project that the company was working on was used as one of the file names to be attacked, or the company name or project that the company is working on being used in the documents being sent to the end users and trying to entice them to open it up is a good indication of a targeted attack. We also see attacks that target conference websites. So organizations that have either a large conference that they host or that their end users go to, or it's a big part of their industry, seeing information come about that conference or those websites being targeted, obviously could be a good indication that this might be more targeted towards your organization instead of just a shotgun approach or attackers looking for the low-hanging fruit. So the first one being file names. What sort of file names are the files that come in on? And what are the malware names? Does it have anything to do with your organization or project your company is working on? Second one is being the same malware, different hash. So you're seeing the same file come in multiple times, but maybe there's a little bit of a nuance about that file. Maybe they're changing up the file in some way. They're confident that this piece of malware is going to work and it's going to solve the goals or the problems that they're trying to solve. But maybe they're just trying to get around a specific security tool or getting around a security posture. They're trying to get around whitelisting. So some examples of that is we had monitored a group that had used pretty much the same piece of malware over I think it was like a 3 to 4 month period. But you could see that they had changed the way that they had attached this malware to different types of files to get around different securities and get around different defenses at organizations. So over a couple month period, these attackers had used the same file, the same malware, but 34% of the time they were using RTF files. 21% of the time they were using Excel documents, Excel files to attach to their malicious, their malware. 20% of the times they were using self-extracting RAR files. 11% of the time they were using Word files, malicious Word files to drop their malware. 7% of the time they were using PDFs, and 7% of the time they said, screw it, we're just going to send an executable right to them. But you can see the difference, the way the attackers are switching up their techniques. They're confident that this piece of malware was going to work, but they were just changing up the ways that they were getting it in. They were trying to do, maybe this organization allows executables or PDFs to come in, but this organization allows documents to come in and doesn't allow executables. So changing up the way that this malware can get into a network could be another indication that this is more targeted. They're confident that this malware can work. They have information within your organization that they want to get, and they're just trying different attack vectors to get into this network. Because remember, these advanced attackers, if there's data that they desperately need to solve these problems we talked about, they're not just going to move on to a different organization and say, well, that one was very hard, let's just move on to the next one. If the organizational data that you have is of high importance, the attackers are going to continue to find ways and continue to change up their tactics and techniques to try and get in, because remember, they're trying to get specific data to solve specific problems that they're either been tasked with or that their government is trying to solve. So the file names is one indication. Seeing multiple same pieces of malware come in, but maybe with different hashes or different infection vectors. The third one, who in your organization is receiving the file? It's one thing if everyone in your organization had received a malicious spam or a malicious email, or everyone had received it and some people from their Gmail had received it. But it's another thing if only the senior managers in the finance department were receiving this email, or only the people in the Hong Kong R&D center were receiving this email, or only the administrative assistants for a certain department was receiving this email. So if you're able to do some of the analysis on who's receiving these emails and who's receiving these attacks, could be an indication that this is more targeted. Is this a shotgun approach that they're just trying to get anyone, or is this only going to our R&D department? You can also use this for training and say, look, marketing, you guys are receiving 80% of the malicious emails. You need to do an extra day of training, or you need to have a little bit more vigilance or awareness of the type of files that we see coming in. So being able to identify who in your organization is receiving these emails could be a good indication to be able to tell if this is a targeted attack versus this is sort of a shotgun approach, willing to take anyone who will open the email. So the file being number 3, the fourth one being specific callbacks. So when malware infects a network, it's got to call out to some server or some network somewhere to receive instructions to send the data out, the stolen data out, and basically to keep sort of stay alive. So when it sends it out, more than likely not, it's either going to an IP address or a domain name. So being able to identify if there's specific callback names that have something to do with your organization could be an indication that this is a targeted attack. We've seen targeted attacks that the malware uses the company name in the callback, similar to like the file name. So it's companyname.noip.com or a project the company is working on.dymedns.com. With the idea that maybe the IT department will see this network traffic and say, well, maybe sales or maybe marketing had set up a website that we weren't familiar with, so maybe it's legitimate traffic. So the attackers are trying to hide the noise by using a company name or a project that the company is working on in the callback domain. So again, another good indication that this could be more targeted to your organization is seeing a company name or seeing a project with your company being used as a callback within the malware. And so the fifth one is the referrers or the watering holes. So the idea behind this is if people are going to a website and they're getting infected in your organization, it's one thing if they're going to nbc.com and they're getting infected. It's another thing if they're going to an organization that you outsource your HR to, or you're working with another organization to set up a trade show, or this is an organization that you've been working with a project in. So being able to tell what websites your end users are going to when they become a victim could be an indication that this is more of a targeted attack. One of the stories I always like to use is we had seen a company, a large oil and gas company that was targeted, and their end users were visiting certain websites and getting infected. They did a little bit more of analysis and came to the realization that there was a Vietnamese restaurant that was located near the oil and gas headquarters, that both the menus and the special page were infected and serving with malware. So whenever the oil and gas workers were looking to see what the menu was or to see what the specials were for that day, they were getting infected with malware. So obviously something like that might be a little bit more targeted, seeing as how it's located near the oil and gas company, versus if their end users were going to CNN.com or NBC.com and getting infected that way. So being able to tell what websites your victims are getting infected by could be an indication of it's more of a targeted attack versus more of a shotgun approach attack. So from a threat intelligence perspective, so what does this all look like together? What does this look like when you pull all this information, the malware analysis, the incident response, and the strategic analysis together? So pulling this information together and pulling it from multiple sources like product, like incident response engagements, like external relationships with law enforcement, researches, like doing some malware analysis and taking open source information. There's really an example of how you can see this all being put together in practice. So there's one case study that we have seen a group called Fin4. Now I'm going to try and build this out. So this group is a financially motivated group. They were compromising email accounts, sending spear phishing. They were specifically targeting healthcare and pharmaceuticals. They were also looking at advisory firms for mergers and acquisitions. And they were looking for, again, trading advantage for R&D information or drug approval announcements so that they can get stock manipulation and understand what's going on with the network. So the way we were able to identify that initially is there were some incidents that we were called in to do incident response at some financial firms. And after we had seen this technique in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional major financial firms, we started to see, okay, from the incident response, we might be able to tell if this is a group, there's similar activity, there's similar methodology, and there's similar targeting. Is this something that we can pull together and see attackers? So what we did is we took those information, that methodology, and those targets and that activity, and we deployed that across our FireEye products throughout the world. The malware analysis standpoint, we had the incident response of how they were moving laterally. We tied that into our FireEye product to see if there's sort of a malware analysis aspect of here to see what we could see. And from that, we were able to see what the worldwide attack looked like from all the different customers and all the different industries. And we were able to pull that together into a strategic analysis to be able to identify the victims that were compromised, indicators of breach customers, what companies were targeted, what might be targeted in the future, and some signatures and recommendations for widespread detection and prevention. And then having that output being IOC's indicators of compromise, gathering intelligence, IP addresses, and including that back in the intelligence cycle. The malware analysis of the files they were using, the incident response of how they were moving laterally throughout the network led to the strategic analysis of information and white papers and webinars and blogs about a particular group that we had seen target the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. So how can FireEye help in this aspect? So how are we helping organizations when it comes to intelligence? So there's a couple of ways. First, we offer our FireEye Intelligence Center. What that does is basically our area that we pull all of the intelligence from the malware analysis, from the incident response, and from the strategic analysis to be able to tell you what's going on in the world. So news analysis. So something happens in the news. This is the FireEye mandate response on it. Here's how we think what attackers will do based on this. Also, here's a specific group that we see targeting actors. Here's a deep dive on APT4 or APT18. Here's who they go after. Here's how they use the technology. Here's how they normally infect people. Here's how they move laterally. And here's what the information that they try and steal. And then also deep dive on malware analysis. This individual piece of malware moves throughout a network this way. It takes advantage of these vulnerabilities. And here's some indicators of compromise, so you can include these into your security tools, or ways that you can identify if you're a victim. If these are on your endpoint, look for these sorts of things. We also use our analysis for organizations so they can check the files that they're seeing on their network against our intelligence. So if you have a file, or you have an MD5, or you have a callback, uploading that or scanning that against our intelligence, be able to say this executable or this callback is tied to a known group, APT1, APT18, APT19. And here's normally what they do. Here's how they move laterally. Here's why they're targeting organizations. Here's what we see them normally do. And here's ways that you can remediate this threat. And here's ways to help you clean up those networks as well. And then also through our advanced threat intelligence. So customers who have a FireEye web or email boxes, once they're seeing a hit within their network, they can get information about the risk level of that piece of malware. So it's not just you're seeing a hit and says, well, this is malware.exe. We're actually going to give you the risk level of it. Who is this? Are these tied to specific actors that we can identify? Is there attribution around this piece of malware or this callback that we had seen? What are some of the ways that you can mitigate this malware from your network? where does it sit in the kill chain, and what are some of the indicators of compromise, and what's the main way we've seen this piece of malware come throughout our network? So building that malware analysis, incident response, and strategic analysis into all of our products for our customers, whether it be web or email or endpoint or mobile, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the information that I had. I wanted to make